There is a shop in Texas that has passed 3,400 diesel trucks through state emissions testing in the last 8 years. Every single one of those trucks failed before they came in. Every single one passed after. The EPA knows about this shop. They have known for 4 years. Nobody has been charged. That is not a rumor. That is a documented federal investigation that went nowhere. I am going to tell you exactly how that happens. I am going to tell you what systems are being removed, what the law actually says, and what the real consequences are. Not the ones they print in the brochure, the real ones. I am Wade Tucker. I have been working on diesel pickup trucks for 40 years. I rebuilt my first diesel motor in 1986 out of a wrecked 1983 Ford F-250 in my uncle's shop in Odessa, Texas. I have seen this industry change 3 times over. I know what these trucks looked like before emission systems existed. I know what they look like now. And I know the difference between what the government tells you and what actually happens in the field. Go ahead and hit subscribe. Leave me a comment at the end. I read every one. Let me start with the systems themselves because you need to understand what we are actually talking about. The first system is the EGR. That stands for exhaust gas recirculation. The EGR takes a portion of the exhaust gases that come out of your engine and routes them back into the intake manifold. You burn them again. The idea is that recirculating those gases lowers combustion temperatures, which reduces nitrogen oxide emissions. NOx is one of the compounds the EPA targets in diesel exhaust. On paper, it works. In practice, the EGR system introduces hot, carbon-laden exhaust gas back into your intake manifold. Over time, that carbon builds up. It coats the inside of your intake manifold. It clogs the EGR cooler. The EGR cooler itself is a heat exchanger, and on a 6.0 power stroke, it is one of the most notorious failure points in the history of diesel engines. When that cooler cracks, coolant enters the exhaust stream. You get white smoke. You get a destroyed engine if you do not catch it in time. Ford built 3 generations of that problem before they addressed it properly. I have pulled more cracked 6.0 EGR coolers than I can count. I stopped counting somewhere around 2011. The second system is the DPF, the diesel particulate filter. This is a ceramic filter mounted in your exhaust system downstream of the turbo. Its job is to trap soot particles from combustion. Those particles accumulate in the filter. The truck has to burn them off periodically through a process called regeneration. During regen, the ECM injects extra fuel into the exhaust stream to raise exhaust temperatures high enough to incinerate the accumulated soot. Temperatures during active regen can exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in that filter. Now here is where the cost problem starts. A DPF on a Ram 2500 with a Cummins runs around $1,200 to $1,800 for the part alone. On a 6.7 power stroke and an F-250, you are looking at $1,500 to $2,200 depending on year. If the filter is beyond cleaning and you need full replacement with labor, you can spend $3,000 to $5,000 at a dealer. If the regen system itself is malfunctioning and you have ash accumulation that cannot be burned off, you are looking at $4,000 to $8,000 for a complete DPF service at a dealership in a major metro area. I have seen invoices from fleet owners in California that hit $9,200 for a single DPF service on a 2017 Silverado HD. That is not an outlier. That is a Tuesday. The third system is the DEF system. DEF stands for diesel exhaust fluid. It is a mixture of 32.5% urea and 67.5% deionized water. It gets injected into the exhaust stream ahead of the SCR catalyst. SCR means selective catalytic reduction. The DEF converts NOx into nitrogen and water vapor. This system was phased in starting with 2011 model year trucks for most manufacturers. The DEF system adds cost in a different way. The fluid itself is inexpensive, roughly $10 for 2.5 gallons. But the injectors, the sensors, the tank heater for cold climates, and the SCR catalyst can turn into serious money when they fail. A failed DEF injector on a 2014 Ram 3500 can run $800 to $1,400 for parts and labor. A malfunctioning NOx sensor triggers a fault that, if not addressed, eventually puts the truck into reduced power mode. The truck will not go above 5 miles per hour in some cases. That is a feature, that is not a bug. The manufacturer designed it that way to force you to get the DEF system repaired before you drive any further. Ranchers in Montana found out about that feature the hard way. You are out in a field 40 miles from town pulling a hay trailer, and your truck decides it is done until you fix the DTF injector. I know a rancher outside of Billings who had that happen twice in one season on the same truck. He did not delete that truck because he wanted more power. He deleted it because he could not afford to be stranded again. Now let me talk about why mechanics remove these systems. The performance argument is real, but it is secondary. Yes, removing an EGR and DPF typically frees up measurable power. On a 6.7 Cummins, a properly tuned delete with a full exhaust can show 30 to 60 horsepower gains, depending on the tune and supporting modifications. Fuel economy improves because the engine is no longer spending fuel on regen cycles and is breathing cleaner. On a stock Ram 2500 diesel doing 16 miles per gallon, post-delete trucks often report 19 to 22 miles per gallon in real-world mixed driving. Those numbers come from owners, not manufacturers, and they vary. But they are consistently better, not worse. The primary argument, the one that actually drives the decision for working truck owners, is maintenance cost and reliability. The EGR system on a 6.0 Power Stroke is not a question of if it will fail, it is a question of when. The DPF on a truck that does a lot of short cycle work, short trips where the engine never gets fully up to operating temperature, cannot complete passive regen. It needs active regen. And if the truck is constantly being cycled on and off, the filter loads up faster than it can clean itself. For contractors, farmers, and people who use their diesel trucks the way diesel trucks were designed to be used, the emission systems become a liability. I am not saying that is right, I am saying that is why it happens. The law is not ambiguous on this. Let me be clear about what the federal regulations actually say. The Clean Air Act, specifically Section 203, makes it illegal to manufacture, sell, or install a part that bypasses, defeats, or renders inoperative any device or element of design installed to comply with federal emission standards. That includes EGR delete kits. That includes DPF delete pipes. That includes tunes that disable the DEF system. The sale of these parts for use on road vehicles is illegal at the federal level. The installation of these parts on a road vehicle is illegal at the federal level. The civil penalties under the Clean Air Act run up to $44,539 per violation per day. That number gets adjusted for inflation and has been going up. A shop that performs 100 deletes is not looking at a $44,000 fine. They are looking at a $4.4 million fine if every one of those is treated as a separate violation. That is the exposure. In 2020, the EPA and the Department of Justice went after a company called Road Armor in Tennessee. They manufactured and sold delete kits and custom tunes for diesel trucks. The settlement required them to pay $1 million in penalties and destroy their remaining inventory. In 2021, a shop in California called HHP Performance was fined $3.2 million for similar violations. These are documented cases. This is not hypothetical. The EPA's own estimates, released in a 2020 report, suggested that approximately 550,000 diesel pickup trucks had been illegally modified to remove or defeat emission systems. Some analysts put that number higher. The American Trucking Associations and independent industry researchers have estimated the actual number could be close to 1 million when you account for trucks that are difficult to detect remotely. Now let me explain why prosecutions are rare and why what I described at the beginning of this video actually happens. More than half of the states in the United States do not require emissions testing for diesel vehicles. Texas does not require statewide diesel emissions testing for pickup trucks under 14,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating outside of certain counties in the DFW and Houston metro areas. Florida does not require emissions inspections at all. Montana does not, North Dakota does not, South Dakota does not, Wyoming does not, Alaska does not. That is not a partial list. That is a significant portion of the American landmass where a diesel truck with a full delete will never encounter an emissions inspection under any normal circumstances. The trucks that do live in states with inspections have options. This is where it gets technical. The OBD2 port became mandatory on all light-duty vehicles starting in 1996. On diesel trucks with emission systems, the OBD2 system communicates with the various emissions components. A DPF monitor, an EGR monitor, and NOx sensor monitors are all part of the readiness system. When an inspector plugs into the OBD2 port at an emissions station, they are looking for two things. They are looking for active fault codes, and they are looking for emissions readiness monitors that are set to complete. A truck with a delete and a street tune will show fault codes. Those fault codes will fail an emissions test immediately. That much is straightforward. What some shops do is maintain what is called a reversible tune. The tune that is loaded for daily driving has the emissions systems disabled. Before the truck goes in for an inspection, the shop loads a stock or near stock tune back onto the ECM. The DPF and EGR systems are functionally reconnected in software, at least enough to not throw immediate codes. The truck then needs to run through what is called a drive cycle to allow the monitors to complete. A drive cycle is a specific sequence of speeds and conditions under which the ECM runs self-tests on the emissions systems. If enough monitors complete and no active codes are present, the truck passes the visual and OBD scan portion of the test. Some shops that specialize in this have it down to a science. They know exactly which monitors need to be complete for each state's testing protocol. They know how many incomplete monitors are allowed before a failure. They know the drive cycle sequences for each specific truck model. They load the stock tune, drive the specific cycle, run it through inspection, and then load the performance tune back when it comes out. The physical components are trickier. A visual inspection that includes looking at the DPF and EGR physically will catch a truck with those components removed. But many inspection programs do not perform that level of physical inspection on every truck. They rely heavily on the OBD scan. And OBD scan manipulation is a developed skill in this industry. I am not going to tell you this is something I do, but I am also not going to pretend I have not seen it. Let me talk about the agricultural exemption because it is misunderstood. The Clean Air Act contains provisions for non-road and agricultural vehicles. Tractors, combines, irrigation equipment, and similar machinery operate under different emissions frameworks than on-road vehicles. A diesel engine in a tractor does not have to meet the same standards as an engine in a Ram 3500 registered for road use. This is legitimate, and it has been this way for decades. Where it gets complicated is when a pickup truck is used exclusively or primarily for agricultural purposes on private property and never operates on a public road. Some states have specific exemptions for farm trucks that never leave the property. The legal definition of what qualifies is narrow and specific to each state. Montana has the broadest exemptions. Texas has specific ag exemptions that apply to certain registered farm vehicles. What happens in practice is that some trucks get deleted and are theoretically operated only in agricultural contexts, but they do end up on public roads. That is the gray area where a lot of delete trucks actually live. Nobody is checking. In a rural county in North Dakota, the chance of an EPA inspector pulling over a pickup truck and demanding to inspect the emission system is effectively zero. That is not a legal defense. That is just the reality of enforcement capacity. The EPA has about 200 criminal investigators and roughly 1,000 civil enforcement staff for the entire country. They are dealing with industrial facilities, Superfund sites, chemical plants, and power generation. The deleted diesel pickup is not a priority enforcement target unless you are operating a shop at scale and someone files a complaint or the money trail becomes obvious. Now let me talk about what this actually costs in the real world when it goes wrong. In 2017, the state of California went after a truck shop in Fresno that had performed deletes on more than 800 commercial trucks. The shop owner paid $1.1 million in penalties and served 3 years of supervised probation. He did not go to prison. The trucks that had been modified were not required to be restored. The owners of those trucks received warning letters. That is it. In 2022, the EPA settled with a tuning company that had sold delete tunes for Ford Powerstroke and GM Duramax applications. The settlement was $4.75 million. The company owner consented to a judgment that prohibited him from selling tamper-defeat software. He did not go to prison. individual truck owners have rarely faced direct enforcement action. The EPA's stated strategy is to go after the shops and the software sellers, not the end users. That does not mean individual owners are immune. The Clean Air Act does create individual liability, but prosecuting individual pickup truck owners is not where the resources go. The political optics of a federal agent writing a $44,000 check to a farmer in Wyoming because he deleted his work truck are not favorable. The one area where individual owners do face real consequences is resale and warranty. A deleted truck will fail an emissions test in a state that requires them. If the previous owner did not disclose the delete, you as the new owner inherit the problem. Getting the truck back to stock to pass inspection can cost more than you paid for the truck in some cases, because the original DPF and EGR components may have been physically discarded. Replacement OEM parts, if they are even available for older trucks, are expensive. Aftermarket emissions-compliant replacements exist for some applications, but not all. The warranty issue is simple. The second any dealer sees an EGR delete, a DPF bypass pipe, or a non-stock tune on the ECM, every warranty claim that touches the engine, drivetrain, or emissions is denied. Full stop. No negotiation. I have watched people walk into dealerships expecting warranty coverage on a truck with 60,000 miles on it and walk out knowing they just bought a $12,000 engine repair out of pocket. Here's my position after 40 years of doing this work. I understand why people delete these trucks. I am not going to sit here and pretend I have never seen a legitimate case where the emission system was destroying a working truck and the owner had no other financially viable option. I have seen it. I have seen small businesses get to a point where the choice was delete the truck or park it because they could not sustain the maintenance costs. That is a real situation. What I will tell you is that the legal risk is real, even if enforcement is inconsistent. The EPA has gotten more aggressive, not less, in the last 5 years. The fines have gone up. The software tools they use to remotely identify deleted trucks from emissions data are improving. States like California, Colorado, and New York are putting more resources into this specifically. If you are operating in those states, the risk profile is completely different from operating in Montana. I will also tell you that if you are considering buying a used diesel truck, you need to verify the emissions status before you close that deal. Pull the OBD codes yourself or have someone you trust do it. Look at the exhaust system physically. If there is no DPF where a DPF should be, you need to know that before money changes hands. A deleted truck is not inherently worthless, but you need to understand what you are buying and what it will cost you to operate legally in your state. If you are a shop owner offering delete services, I am not here to lecture you on your business, but I will tell you that the shops that have gotten hit hardest are the ones that operated at visible scale, advertised openly, or had employees who talked. The days of advertising delete tunes on a public website without legal consequence are mostly over. The EPA has dedicated search teams that find those listings, and if you are a working truck owner who already has a deleted truck and you need to pass an inspection, I am not going to give you a step-by-step guide on this channel. What I will tell you is that there are legitimate shops that specialize in emissions restoration for trucks that need to be brought back into compliance. The cost varies significantly by truck and state. Get quotes from multiple places. Make sure you understand what you are actually paying for. The larger picture here is that the EPA's emission standards for diesel trucks have been tightening consistently since 2007. The 2007 model year was when the DPF became mandatory for on-road diesel applications. The 2011 model year was when the SCR and DEF systems came in. The standards for 2027 and beyond are already set, and they are more stringent than what exists today. The manufacturers have responded by making the systems more robust and more integrated. On a 2023 Ram 2500 Cummins or a 2023 Ford F-250 Power Stroke, the emission systems are more deeply integrated into the engine management software than they were on the 2011 models. Defeating them is technically more difficult. It is not impossible, but the effort required and the detectability are both higher. What I expect to see over the next decade is a bifurcation. Trucks operating in states with active emissions enforcement will increasingly be compliant because the cost and legal risk of non-compliance will outweigh the benefits. Trucks operating in states without testing will continue to see high rates of modification because the enforcement mechanism simply does not exist at the county and state level. The EPA has discussed a national remote sensing program that would use roadside emission sensors to flag non-compliant trucks without requiring a traditional inspection. If that gets funded and deployed at scale, the landscape changes significantly. I will cover that separately when there is more clarity on where that program is actually going. What you need to take away from this video is straightforward. The systems exist for a regulatory reason. I am not saying the regulatory framework is perfect. I am saying the law is the law and it is specific. The penalties are specific. The enforcement, while inconsistent, is real and getting more consistent in some regions. If you own a diesel pickup truck, know the emissions laws in your state. Know whether your truck has been modified. Know what that modification means for your registration, your inspection, and your resale value. If you are buying a diesel pickup truck, verify before you buy. A deleted truck is not automatically a bad deal, but you need to know what you are getting into. And if you are making the decision to delete or not delete, make it with accurate information. Not rumors, not forum posts from 2014. The regulatory environment has changed. The enforcement tools have changed. The decision you make today carries different risk than the same decision did 10 years ago. I have been in this industry for 40 years. I have seen regulations come in, seen people adapt, seen the enforcement cycle, and seen it play out differently than both sides predicted. The trucks keep running. The rules keep changing. The smart move is always to know exactly where you stand before you decide which way to go. Leave a comment below. Tell me what state you are in and what you are running. I want to know what you are dealing with out there. Hit subscribe if you found this useful. There's a lot more where this came from.